The Harmattan wind swept through Umuora village, carrying with it the scent of dry earth and whispered secrets. Adaeze sat beneath the dying Udara tree behind her father's compound, her knees drawn to her chest, tears streaming down her dark cheeks. At 22 years old, she had become what every Igbo family dreaded: an unmarried daughter, a mouth to feed, a shame to bear. "Useless girl!" her stepmother's voice cut through the evening air like a machete through sugarcane. "While other girls your age are bearing children and bringing bride price to their families, you sit here like a stone, eating our food, wasting our time." Adaeze pressed her palms against her ears, but the words still found their way in. They always did. Her father, Mazi Okonkwo, had married her stepmother, Obiageli, 3 years after Adaeze's mother died from the fever that swept through the village. Since then, Adaeze's life had transformed from bearable to unbearable. Where her mother had once called her "my precious jewel," Obiageli called her "this burden, this curse, this thing that will not leave." The compound where Adaeze lived was a collection of mud houses with rusting zinc roofs, connected by swept red earth pathways. Chickens scratched in the dust. A goat was tethered to a stick near the outdoor kitchen. Everything spoke of poverty, the kind that had settled into the bones of Umuora village like an old disease. "Adaeze," her father's voice, now weaker than her stepmother's, but no less condemning. "Come inside, we need to talk to you." She wiped her face with the edge of her faded wrapper and stood slowly, her heart already knowing that whatever waited inside would not be good. Nothing was ever good anymore. Inside the small sitting room, her father sat on the only cushioned chair they owned, its foam bleeding out from several tears. Obiageli stood beside him, arms folded across her ample chest, her face twisted in that permanent expression of disgust she reserved especially for Adaeze. "Sit down," her father said, not meeting her eyes. Adaeze sat on the mat on the floor, her hands trembling in her lap. "A man has asked for your hand in marriage," her father began, and Adaeze's heart leaped, not with joy, but with terror. In Umuora, when a marriage was announced with such heavy voices, it was never good news. "His name is Chukwudi Okafo, from the Okafo family at the edge of the village. You know them, those wretched people who live near the bush, the ones whose father died leaving them with nothing but debt and shame?" Adaeze's mouth went dry. She knew of the Okafo family. Everybody did. They were spoken of in pitying whispers. The widow and her 2 sons, who could barely afford to eat, who wore clothes so worn you could see through them, who worked other people's farms for a few yams and a handful of coins. "Papa, please," Adaeze started, but her stepmother slapped her hands together sharply. "Please what? You think you have a choice? You think suitors are lining up outside our compound to marry a girl with no beauty, no skills, no value? Your mates are married to doctors, engineers, businessmen, but you, even the poorest man in the village, had to be convinced to take you." "That's enough, Obiageli," her father said quietly, but there was no real authority in his voice. He turned to Adaeze, and for a moment she saw something that might have been regret in his eyes, but it was gone so quickly she might have imagined it. "The bride price is small, very small, but it is something. And you, Adaeze, you need a husband. You are getting old. People talk. They say things about you, about us. This marriage will silence them." "But Papa, please, I don't even know him. I've never spoken to—" "You will marry him," Obiageli interrupted, her voice final as a coffin closing. "The traditional marriage is set for the next market day. 4 days from now. We have already accepted the bride price. It is done." Adaeze felt the room spin around her. 4 days. 4 days until her life ended and a new unknown suffering began. That night, she lay on her thin mat in the small room she shared with her stepmother's daughter, Chiamaka, who was 18 and already married to a banker in the city, visiting home for the holidays, turned over and whispered in the darkness, "I heard about the marriage." Adaeze said nothing. "They say Chukwudi Okafo is handsome, at least," Chiamaka continued, not unkindly. For all her privilege, she had never been cruel to Adaeze. And they say he is quiet, respectful. Maybe it won't be so bad. His family has nothing, Adaeze whispered. Less than nothing. How will we eat? How will we live? Chiamaka was quiet for a long moment. Sometimes, she finally said, God hides blessings in strange places. Maybe this is your blessing, sister. Maybe. But Adaeze could not see how marrying into deeper poverty could ever be a blessing. The morning of her traditional marriage, Adaeze woke before dawn to the sound of her stepmother already shouting orders at the women who had come to help prepare the compound. Move those benches, sweep that corner properly. Do you want people to say we live like animals? Adaeze's stomach churned with anxiety. She had barely eaten in the 4 days since the announcement, and her wrapper hung loose on her shrinking frame. The older women of the compound came to her room to prepare her. They rubbed palm kernel oil into her skin until it shone, plaited her hair into the traditional bridal style, and wrapped her in the simple but clean wrapper and blouse that Obiagili had grudgingly bought for the occasion. You should smile, one of the women, Mama Ngozi, said gently as she adjusted Adaeze's head tie. It is your wedding day. But Adaeze could not smile. How could she smile when she was being sold like a yam in the market to the poorest family in the village, when even the small gathering of guests in the compound whispered and shook their heads at the mismatched marriage? As tradition demanded, she sat on a beautifully painted stool in the center of the compound, her eyes downcast, while her family and the groom's family negotiated and performed the rituals. She heard her stepmother's voice, unusually cheerful, welcoming the Okafor family. She heard the traditional prayers, the kola nut breaking, the palm wine pouring. And then she heard a voice say, "The groom wishes to see his bride." Adaeze's heart hammered against her ribs as she sensed someone approaching. Slowly, she lifted her eyes. Chukwudi Okafor stood before her. The first thing she noticed was that Chiamaka had been right. He was handsome, not in the flashy way of the city boys who came to the village during Christmas, but in a quiet, striking way. His skin was smooth and dark like well-polished ebony. His eyes were deep-set and intelligent, holding something she couldn't quite read. His shoulders were broad, his posture straight despite the threadbare but clean traditional outfit he wore. He looked at her and something passed between them, a shock of recognition that made no sense because they had never met, never spoken. "Adami," he said softly, "my daughter, my wife," the traditional greeting. His voice was like quiet thunder, deep and resonant. She swallowed hard and whispered the response, "Dimmi, my husband." The ceremony continued around them, but Adaeze felt as if she and this stranger existed in a separate world. He did not smile, but there was no cruelty in his face, only watchfulness, as if he was seeing something in her that no one else could see. When it came time for her to choose her husband from among several men, as tradition required, she walked slowly through the crowd and stopped before Chukwudi. She handed him the cup of palm wine, and his fingers brushed hers as he took it. They were warm, calloused from work, but gentle. "Thank you," he murmured, so quietly that only she could hear. Not for the wine, but for something else, for choosing him, for accepting this fate. She did not understand, but she nodded. The celebration that followed was modest. There was jollof rice and chicken, but not much. There was palm wine and music, but the atmosphere was subdued. Adaeze could hear the whispers, could feel the pitying glances. Poor girl, married to a church rat. At least she's married, better than remaining a burden to her family. The Okafor boy is handsome, but what will they eat? Good looks don't fill the stomach. I heard his mother borrowed money just to buy those drinks. Poverty marrying poverty. Nothing good can come of this. Adaeze wanted to disappear, to sink into the red earth and never emerge. But Chukwudi, sitting beside her on the mat of honor, seemed unbothered by the whispers. He ate slowly, deliberately, his face calm. Once, when a particularly loud whisper about those poor, wretched Okafors drifted across the compound, she saw his jaw tighten almost imperceptibly, but that was all. As the sun began to set and the modest celebration wound down, Adaeze's few belongings, a small box of clothes, a Bible, a wooden comb that had been her mother's, were loaded onto a wheelbarrow. This was how poor families transported a bride's things. No car, no van, a wheelbarrow pushed by a young cousin. Obiageli hugged her for the benefit of watching eyes, but whispered in her ear, "Don't come back here complaining when you are hungry. You are their problem now." Her father pressed a few naira notes into her hand. "I'm sorry, Ada," he said quietly. I wish things were different." And then she was walking through the village as the sun set, following her new husband and his family to their compound at the edge of Umora, where the bush began and civilization seemed to end. The Okafor compound was worse than Adaeze had imagined. 3 small mud houses with crumbling walls surrounded a hard-packed earth courtyard. The roofs were patched with rusty zinc and old tarpaulin. A few sickly chickens pecked at the ground. A single kerosene lantern provided light as darkness fell. Chukwudi's mother, Mama Chukwudi, was a thin woman with eyes that had seen too much suffering. Her wrapper was clean but patched in several places. She welcomed Adaeze with a tired smile. "Welcome, my daughter," she said, embracing her. "I know this is not what you expected, but we will manage together." Chukwudi's younger brother, Obina, was 17 and trying to finish secondary school while working odd jobs to help the family. He nodded shyly at Adaeze, clearly embarrassed by their poverty. "Let me show you our room," Chukwudi said quietly. "Our room?" The words felt strange, foreign. He led her to the smallest of the 3 buildings. Inside was a room barely large enough for the thin mattress on the floor, a small wooden box, and a plastic chair. The walls were bare, except for a small calendar from 2019 and a faded photo of a man Adaeze assumed was Chukwudi's late father. "I'm sorry," Chukwudi said, standing in the doorway, his tall frame filling the space. "I know this is not what any woman dreams of." Adaeze set down her small box and turned to face him. In the dim light of the kerosene lamp he carried, his face was half in shadow. "Why did you agree to marry me?" she asked, suddenly, surprising herself with her boldness. "You don't know me, and you could have waited, married someone when your situation improved." Something flickered in his eyes. He was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then he said, "I saw you once, 6 months ago at the stream. You are washing clothes and singing. Do you remember?" She didn't. He continued, "You were singing a church song and you were crying at the same time. I watched you. I'm sorry, I know it was wrong to watch, but I saw how you wrung out each cloth with such care, even though they were old and torn. How you folded them gently, as if they were precious. And I thought, here is a woman who finds dignity in small things, who doesn't let poverty steal her spirit." Adaeze felt tears prick her eyes. No one had ever spoken to her this way. No one had ever really seen her. "I am not a good match," Chukwudi said. "I know what people say about my family. But I promise you this, Adaeze. I will work hard. I will never raise my hand to you. And one day," he paused, seeming to weigh his words carefully, "one day, things will be better. I don't know when, but they will." It was not a promise of wealth or comfort, but it was honest, and there was something in his voice, a certainty that made her want to believe him. That night, she lay on the thin mattress beside her new husband, both of them fully clothed, a respectful distance between them. She could hear rats scurrying in the rafters, could feel the hard floor beneath the mattress, could smell the dampness of the old building. She thought of Chiamaka sleeping in her husband's modern house in the city, with electricity and soft beds and food in the refrigerator. She thought of her stepmother's satisfied smile as she left, finally rid of the burden.
and she wept silently, her face turned to the wall so Chukwudi would not hear. But he heard, and in the darkness his voice came, quiet and firm. I know you are crying. I know you are afraid. But I want you to know something, Adaeze. You are not alone anymore. Whatever comes, we will face it together. She didn't answer, but something in his words settled over her like a thin blanket, not enough to keep out all the cold, but something. The first months of Adaeze's marriage were harder than anything she had ever known.
She woke before dawn every day to sweep the compound, fetch water from the stream half a kilometer away, help Mama Chukwudi prepare the meager breakfast of akamu and bread when there was bread. Most days, there was just the thin pap and maybe a piece of yam. Chukwudi left early each morning to work on other people's farms, carrying his hoe over his shoulder. He returned at dusk, exhausted, with barely enough money to buy the next day's food. Obina did the same after school, working until dark to contribute to the family pot. The women of the village did not make it easier. When Adaeze went to the stream to fetch water, they whispered loud enough for her to hear. See the wife of poverty herself. I heard they ate only garri for 3 days last week. No soup, just garri and water. What kind of life is this? Better to remain unmarried than to suffer like this. At the market, traders would see her carefully counting her few coins to buy the cheapest vegetables, and they would exchange knowing looks. Some felt sorry for her. Others were entertained by the spectacle of her downfall. Is this not the daughter of Mazi Okonko? One particularly cruel woman, Mama Tayo, said loudly one market day. The one who used to hold her head high? Now look at her, bargaining for rotten tomatoes like a beggar. Adaeze's face burned with shame, but she said nothing. What could she see? It was true. The worst part was visiting her father's compound, which tradition required every few weeks. Obiajeli would look her up and down with barely concealed satisfaction. Ah, marriage is treating you well, I see. You look so healthy. Adaeze, who had lost weight from worry and insufficient food, would bite her tongue. Chiamaka, visiting from the city with bags of gifts and stories of her comfortable life, would try to slip money into Adaeze's hand, but Obiajeli always noticed and would make a show of it. See how you have come to depend on charity. I hope you are grateful to your sister for her kindness to you, the poor church rat. But through it all, Chukwudi remained strange. He never complained, never showed frustration or anger at their situation. He worked hard, came home tired, ate whatever small meal was available, and treated Adaeze with a courtesy that seemed almost out of place in their poverty. He never demanded his conjugal rights, never pressured her, never blamed her for the whispers and mockery that followed her like shadows. Sometimes he would catch him watching her with those deep, unreadable eyes, and she wondered what he was thinking, why he seemed so calm when their situation was desperate, why he sometimes smiled to himself as if he knew a secret the rest of the world did not. 3 months into the marriage, things came to a head. Mama Chukwudi fell ill with malaria. She needed medicine, needed to see the doctor, but there was no money. Adaeze watched helplessly as the older woman's condition worsened, her body shaking with fever. We need at least 5,000 naira for the hospital, Obina said desperately. Maybe more. 5,000 naira might as well have been 5 million. They didn't have it. Adaeze made a decision. She took off the small gold earrings her mother had left her, the only thing of value she owned, and went to the market to sell them. A jewelry trader gave her 4,000 naira, far less than they were worth, but she had no choice. She brought the money home and they rushed Mama Chukwudi to the health center. The doctor gave her anti-malarial drugs and fluids, and after 2 days, the fever broke. When Chukwudi learned what Adaeze had done, he pulled her aside in the compound one evening. Your mother's earrings, he said quietly. I know what they meant to you. Adaeze wiped her eyes. Your mother needed medicine. What else could I do? He looked at her for a long moment,
and she saw something fierce and bright flash in his eyes. Then he did something unexpected. He pulled a small folded paper from his pocket and handed it to her. "What is this?" she asked. "Open it when you are alone, and don't tell anyone, not yet." Before she could ask more, he walked away to help Obinna with the evening chores.
Doesn't know. He was too young when father died. We told him we lost everything to debt, to bad business. It was easier than the truth. Adaeze struggled to process this. So all this time, while we've been starving, while your mother was sick, while people mocked us, you had millions of naira sitting in a bank? Yes, his voice was heavy with the weight of that yes. How could you? Adaeze felt anger rising in her chest, hot and sharp. How could you watch your mother suffer? Watch me sell my mother's earrings. Let us be humiliated every day. Because I needed to know, Chukwudi stood abruptly, his usual calm cracking. I needed to know if he would love me without money, if my family would stay loyal without wealth, if anyone in this village had a pure heart. That's cruel, Adaeze shot back, standing to face him. She searched for the word, that's playing with people's lives like they are toys. Perhaps, he said quietly, his anger deflating as quickly as it had risen. Perhaps it is. But my father died a bitter, lonely man, surrounded by people who smiled to his face and plotted his death behind his back. He wanted better for me, and I wanted to honor his wish. Adaeze sat back down on the mattress, her legs suddenly weak. When? She asked. When do the 7 years end? 2 weeks, Chukwudi said. In 2 weeks, I turned 23. 7 years since my father died. The trust will be released to me and I can use it however I wish. 2 weeks. Just 2 more weeks of this suffering and everything would change. Why did you tell me now? Why not wait 2 more weeks? He knelt before her, taking her hands in his. His eyes, in the flickering lamplight, were intense, earnest. Because I saw what you did for my mother. You gave up the last precious thing you owned, the last piece of your own mother, to save mine. Not because you had to, not because anyone was watching or would praise you, but because it was right, because you have a good heart. His grip tightened on her hands. I have watched you these 3 months, Adaeze. I have seen you endure mockery and hunger and shame, and you never once complained. You never once blamed me. You worked hard, treated my family with respect, held your head high even when the world tried to crush you down. You are exactly what my father said I should look for. Someone real, someone gold. Tears streamed down Adaeze's face. I don't know if I can forgive you, she whispered, for letting us suffer when you could have helped. I know, he said. I don't know if I can forgive myself, but I'm telling you now because I want you to know. When the inheritance comes, it's not just mine, it's ours. Everything I have, you have, because you earned it, not by being my wife, but by being who you are. Adaeze pulled her hands from his and turned away. Her mind was chaos. Part of her wanted to scream at him. Part of her wanted to laugh at the absurdity. Part of her wanted to run back to her father's house and tell everyone the truth. Don't tell anyone yet, Chukwudi said, as if reading her thoughts. Please, 2 more weeks. Let me finish what I started. And then we will show this village what true wealth looks like, what true character looks like. We will show them everything. Adaeze looked at her husband, this stranger who was not a stranger, this poor man who was secretly rich, this mystery who had chosen her for reasons she still didn't fully understand. 2 weeks, she finally said. I'll keep your secret for 2 weeks. But after that, Chukwudi said, a small smile touching his lips for the first time since she'd known him. After that, Mayada, everything changes. The next 2 weeks were the longest of Adaeze's life. Now that she knew the truth, everything looked different. Every moment of suffering felt both bearable and more unbearable.
She would fetch water from the stream, her arms aching, and think, "This is temporary. In days, I will never have to do this again." But then, she would see another woman laughing at her worn wrapper, and the anger would rise. Chukwudi could end this now, today, but he chooses not to. Mama Chukwudi, recovered from her illness, noticed the change in Adaeze. "You seem different, my daughter," she said one morning as they prepared breakfast. "Lighter, somehow. Is everything well with you and my son?" Adaeze almost laughed. If only the woman knew her son's secret. But she had promised Chukwudi she would wait. "Everything is complicated, Mama," she said carefully. The older woman smiled knowingly. "Marriage is always complicated, but I see how my son looks at you. Whatever complications there are, they will smooth out. He is a good man, my Chukwudi, patient, wise beyond his years." Wise or cruel, Adaeze wondered. She still hadn't decided.
The tests, however, were not over. 1 week before the inheritance was to be released, Adaeze's stepmother arrived at the Okafor compound unannounced, her face twisted in false concern. "Adaeze, my daughter," she said, loud enough for the neighbors to hear. "I have come to check on you. Your father and I worry so much about your situation here." Inside the small sitting room, with Mama Chukwudi present, Obiageli's mask dropped. "How much longer will you endure this poverty?" she hissed at Adaeze. "You have a chance to leave. Eze, the trader from Onitsha, his wife just died. He is looking for a young second wife. He saw you in the market and asked about you. He is willing to pay your bride price again, double what we receive from these wretched Okafors." Adaeze's stomach turned. "I am married, Mama." "To poverty," Obiageli spat. "To suffering. What kind of marriage is this? You think love feeds the stomach? Pride clothes the body. Be wise, girl. Leave this place. Come home and we will arrange." "No." Adaeze's voice was firm. "I made vows. I am staying with my husband." Something flickered in Mama Chukwudi's eyes. Pride, perhaps. Or relief. Obiageli's face darkened. "You foolish girl. You will regret this. Don't come crying to us when you are starving in the street." She stormed out, her expensive wrapper swishing, leaving behind a cloud of perfume and venom. That evening, when Chukwudi came home, Adaeze told him what happened. "You could have left," he said quietly. "I would have understood. This life, I know how hard it is." "I gave you my word," I said. 2 weeks, I said. I keep my promises." But truthfully, it wasn't just about the promise anymore. Something had shifted in her. She had seen Chukwudi's care for his mother, his quiet dignity, the way he walked without complaint. She had heard his story, and despite her anger at his deception, she understood the wound his father had left, the need to know who was real. And maybe, just maybe, she was starting to see that she had passed a test she didn't know she was taking. 3 days before the inheritance release, disaster struck. Chukwudi was working on Chifemeka's farm, clearing bush, when the man's son, Ada, came to supervise. Ada was everything Chukwudi pretended not to be. Wealthy, arrogant, educated in the city. "Work faster, Okafor. I pay you enough. Or is it that poverty has made you lazy?" Chukwudi said nothing, just continued working steadily. "I hear your wife is very beautiful," Ada continued, a nasty edge to his voice. "Too beautiful for someone like you. Such a waste. Tell me, how do you satisfy her when you can't even afford to feed her properly?" The other workers shifted uncomfortably. Everyone knew Ada was trying to provoke a fight. Chukwudi straightened slowly, his hoe in his hand, his face calm but his eyes blazing. "Speak about my wife with respect," he said quietly. Ada laughed. "Or what? You will fight me? You will lose your job? Go ahead, poor man. Show me what you..." He didn't finish. Chukwudi moved with surprising speed, grabbing Ada by his shirt collar and said, "My wife's name is not for your mouth. Speak of her again and wealth will not protect you from what comes next." For a moment, real fear flashed in Ada's eyes. Then Chifemeka himself appeared, drawn by the commotion. "What is happening here?" Ada, recovering his courage, pointed at Chukwudi. This laborer attacked me for no reason. He should be arrested." Chukwudi released Ada and stepped back, his face once again calm. The chief looked between them.
He was an old man, shrewd and observant. "Ada," he said to his son, "go back to the house."
But father, now. When Ada had gone, sulking, the chief turned to Chukwudi. "You have your father's eyes," he said quietly, "and his pride. That pride cost him dearly." Chukwudi's jaw tightened. "You knew my father?" "Before the wealth, yes. We were friends once, before he became someone I didn't recognize." The chief paused. "I heard he left you nothing but debt." "People hear many things," Chukwudi said carefully. The chief smiled slightly. "Indeed they do. Go home, young man, and know this. A man who defends his wife's honor is wealthy in ways money cannot measure." That night, Chukwudi came home with his pay and a bonus the chief had quietly added. It was enough to buy rice, chicken, vegetables, a feast by their standards. "What happened?" Adaeze asked, seeing the money. Chukwudi told her about Ada, about the confrontation, about the chief's strange words. "You could have lost your job for me when you have—" "Money means nothing if I cannot protect your name," he interrupted. "That I learned from my father. He protected his wealth, but lost his soul. I will not make that mistake." And for the first time since learning his secret, Adaeze looked at her husband and felt something warm unfold in her chest. Not love, not yet, but maybe the beginning of it. 2 days before the inheritance release, Chukwudi came to her with a request. "I want you to invite your family," he said. "Your father, Obiageli, Chiamaka, anyone who mocked us, anyone who pitied us. I want them all here in 2 days for a small celebration I'm planning." "What kind of celebration?" Adaeze asked suspiciously. Chukwudi smiled, and this time it was a full smile, transforming his face. "A celebration of 7 years ending, a celebration of truth. Trust me, Adam, just trust me." She looked into his eyes and made her choice. "I trust you," she said, and meant it. The morning of the inheritance release dawned bright and clear, the harmattan haze lifting to reveal a sky so blue it looked painted. Adaeze woke early, her stomach churning with anticipation and nerves. Today was the day everything would change. Today, the 7 years of her husband's test would end. But Chukwudi was already gone. Mama Chukwudi said, her eyes twinkling with a secret knowledge. "He said he had preparations to make and that you should get ready. He said to wear your best wrapper." Adaze's best wrapper was still the one from her wedding day, simple but clean. She bathed carefully, oiled her skin, and dressed, her hands trembling slightly. She had sent word to her family the day before, as Chukwudi requested. They had all agreed to come, though Obiageli's message back was snide. "If this is another chance to witness your suffering, we will gladly attend." By mid-morning, the Okafor compound was filling with people. Adaze's father arrived first, looking uncomfortable. Then Chiamaka with her husband. Then Obiageli, dressed in expensive Ankara, her face already arranged in an expression of pity and superiority. The neighbors came too, drawn by curiosity. Mama Ngozi, Mama Tayo, the women from the stream, the traders from the market, even Chief Emeka arrived, his presence causing whispers of confusion. Why would such a wealthy man attend a gathering at the poorest compound in the village? Obina, who still didn't know the truth, looked bewildered by the crowd gathering in their small compound. And then a sound that made everyone turn, the purr of expensive car engines. 3 black SUVs pulled up at the edge of the compound, so sleek and new they looked like they belonged in a different world. The crowd parted, confused, as men in suits emerged.
Adaeze recognized one of them from the photo in Chukwudi's room, her husband's father, but younger. No, not his father, a relative perhaps. The man approached Mama Chukwudi and embraced her warmly. "Mama, it is time," he said gently. Then Chukwudi emerged from the last vehicle. But this was not the Chukwudi the village knew. He wore a perfectly tailored traditional outfit, rich fabric, expert embroidery, the kind that cost more than most people in Umora.
Earned in a year. His bearing was different too. Still calm, still dignified, but now radiating an unmistakable authority. The compound fell silent. Chukwudi walked to the center of the courtyard, his eyes finding Adaeze. He smiled at her, a small, private smile, before addressing the crowd. "Thank you all for coming," he began, his voice carrying easily across the silent crowd. "I have asked you here today as witnesses. Witnesses to a truth that has been hidden for 7 years." He gestured to the man in the suit. "This is Barrister Okonkwo, my late father's lawyer and the trustee of my father's estate. Barrister, please." The lawyer stepped forward, holding a folder. 7 years ago, Chief Okafor Azubuike died. He left behind a considerable fortune, businesses, properties, investments worth over 4 billion naira. Gasps rippled through the crowd. 4 billion naira was an impossible sum in Umora village. Before his death, the lawyer continued, the chief made an unusual request. He asked that his son, Chukwudi, live in poverty for 7 years before claiming his inheritance. This was to test character, his own and those around him. Today, that 7-year period ends. Today, Mr. Chukwudi Okafor claimed his rightful inheritance and reveals his true identity. The crowd erupted in noise, shock, disbelief, confusion. Adaeze saw her stepmother's face turn ashen, saw the market women who had mocked her cover their mouths, saw Chief Emeka nodding slowly as if pieces were finally fitting together. Obiageli found her voice first. This is a trick, a lie. The Okafors are poor. Everyone knows." "Everyone knows what we allowed them to know," Chukwudi interrupted calmly. "The poverty was real in the sense that we did not spend the money, but the wealth was always there, waiting." He turned to his mother. "Mama, I'm sorry for the years of suffering, but thank you for understanding. Thank you for helping me honor Father's wish." Mama Chukwudi's eyes were wet, but she was smiling. "You have become the man your father dreamed of, my son. That is worth any suffering." Then Chukwudi turned to Obina, whose face was a mask of confusion. "Brother, I'm sorry I kept this from you. I will explain everything. But know this, you never have to walk another person's farm again. Your education will be completed at the best university in Nigeria. Our suffering is over." Obina looked like he might faint. Finally, Chukwudi's eyes found Adaeze. The crowd seemed to hold its breath as he walked to her, took her hands. "Adaeze, my wife," he said softly, though everyone could hear in the silence. "You came to me thinking I had nothing. You endured poverty, mockery, hunger. You gave up your mother's earrings to save mine. You defended our marriage when you could have left. You stayed when anyone with sense would have run." He knelt before her, there in front of everyone. This man who was secretly worth billions, kneeling in the dust. "I have tested you without your knowledge, and I am ashamed of that. But you have proven yourself to be gold, pure, precious, unbreakable. Everything I have is yours, not because you are my wife, but because you earned it with your character, your strength, your loyal heart." Tears streamed down Adaeze's face. "Chukwudi," he stood, still holding her hands. "I know you are angry. I know you may not forgive me, but I promise you this. From this day forward, you will never know poverty again. You will never be mocked again, and everyone who looked down on you will learn what it means to judge by appearances." He turned to address the crowd, his voice taking on steel.
To those who mocked my wife, who called her names, who pitied her suffering, who took pleasure in her suffering, I want you to see her now. See her as I have always seen her, a queen who walked through fire and emerged unburned. She is worth more than all of you combined. Mama Tayo, who had been so cruel at the market, looked like she wanted the earth to swallow her. Chukwudi's gaze found Obiageli. And to you, stepmother, who called her a burden, who tried to sell her to another man even after marriage, who took pleasure in her poverty, I want you to know that the church rat you married her to is now one of the wealthiest men in this state. How does that knowledge taste? Obiageli's mouth opened and closed like a fish. No sound came out. The bride price you received was 15,000 naira. An insult. Today, I am giving my wife's father 2 million naira, not as bride price because she is not for sale, but as thanks for raising such a remarkable woman, despite the circumstances. He nodded to the lawyer, who handed a bank envelope to Adaeze's father. The man took it with shaking hands, his face unreadable.
And to my wife, Chukwudi said, turning back to Adaeze, I gave what I should have given from the start. Honesty, partnership, and a promise. We will build a new house, not here, but wherever you wish. We will help this village, build a school, a health center, whatever is needed. We will live well, but we will also lift others. That is the lesson I learned these 7 years. Wealth is meaningless if it is not shared. He pulled out a small box from his pocket and opened it. Inside was a ring, gold, with diamonds that caught the sunlight and scattered it like stars. I know we are already married, he said, but I want to do this properly. Adaeze, will you choose me again? Not the poor man I pretended to be, but the real me, flawed, imperfect, but completely yours? Adaeze looked at the ring, at her husband, at the crowd of witnesses. She thought of the 3 months of suffering, of the mockery, the hunger, the shame. She thought of selling her mother's earrings, of fetching water at dawn, of lying on a thin mattress and crying herself to sleep. But she also thought of Chukwudi's quiet dignity, his defense of her honor, his care for his mother, the way he had worked alongside her, never complaining, never cruel, the way he had seen her, really seen her, when everyone else saw only a burden. She thought of his father's dying wish and understood it now. In a way, she had been tested too, and she had passed. Yes, she said, her voice clear and strong. I choose you. I choose us. The crowd erupted as Chukwudi slipped the ring onto her finger and kissed her there in front of everyone, sealing their second marriage, the one built on truth. The weeks that followed Chukwudi's revelation transformed Umuora village in ways no one could have imagined. The first change was the Okafor compound itself. Chukwudi hired construction workers who arrived the very next day. Within a week, the old mud houses were being torn down. Within a month, a magnificent new house rose in their place, modern, spacious, beautiful, but designed in the traditional Igbo style to honor their heritage. Adaeze watched it all with a mixture of wonder and surreality. She had gone to sleep one night as the poorest woman in the village and awakened to find herself wealthy beyond imagination. The second change was in how people treated her. Suddenly, the women who had mocked her at the stream were all smiles and warm greetings. Ah, Adaeze, my dear sister, how are you? I was just telling Mama Ngozi how I always knew you were special. Do you remember when we helped you that day? We are old friends, are we not? Your husband is so generous, so kind. You are so blessed. Adaeze would smile politely, but inside, she burned with a cold anger. She remembered every insult, every cruel laugh, every pitying look. Chukwudi had warned her this would happen. When you have nothing, people show their true faces. When you have everything, they wear masks. Never forget who was real when you had nothing. Mama Tayo, the market woman who had been particularly cruel, now tried to give Adaeze the best vegetables, refusing payment. Please, my dear daughter,
Take them as a gift. Are we not family? The village must support one another. Adaeze looked at her steadily. When I came to you a month ago with my last few coins, begging for fresh vegetables because my mother-in-law was sick, you sold me rotten tomatoes and laughed when I left. Do you remember that, Mama Tayo? The woman's smile faltered. I remember, Adaeze said quietly. I remember everything. So no, I will not take your vegetables as a gift. I will pay full price, and I will buy them from Mama Ngozi instead, who at least sold me decent vegetables even when she thought I had no money. She walked away, her head high, leaving Mama Tayo standing in shame. The third change was in Adaeze's own family. Her father came to visit the new house, humble and quiet. He sat with Adaeze in the beautiful parlor, surrounded by furniture that cost more than his entire compound. Ada, he said softly, I owe you an apology, many apologies. I failed you as a father. I let Obiageli convince you are a burden. I married you off like you are nothing. And you are everything. You are everything. Adaeze felt her father's anger soften. He was weak, yes, but he was not cruel like Obiageli, just weak. I forgive you, Papa, but things must change. You must stand up to Obiageli. You must protect Chiamaka. Make sure she's treated well. Her father nodded, tears in his eyes. I will try, my daughter. I will try. Obiageli, however, never came to apologize. Instead, she sent messages through others, asking for money, for help with this or that. Adaeze ignored them all.
When Chiamaka visited, genuinely happy for Adaeze, with no jealousy in her heart, she brought news. Mother is furious, Chiamaka said with a small smile. She cannot believe that the marriage she arranged to humiliate you has made you the richest woman in the village. Father gave her some of the money Chukwudi gave him, but she spent it all in 2 weeks trying to impress people. Now she wants more. She will get nothing from me, Adaeze said firmly. She made her choices. Now she lives with them. Chiamaka nodded approvingly. You have become strong, sister. Marriage to Chukwudi has made you into iron. But Adaeze knew the truth. She had always been iron. She had just needed the fire to reveal it. The fourth change was the most important, the change in Umora village itself. Chukwudi had meant what he said about sharing wealth. He called a village meeting and announced his plans. I am building a primary school, he said, with modern classrooms, computers, a library. Children in Umora will no longer have to walk 5 kilometers to the nearest school. The village erupted in cheers. I am also building a health center, he continued, with doctors, nurses, medicine. No one will die from simple malaria because they cannot afford treatment. More cheers, louder now. And I am creating jobs. I am starting businesses, a farm, a factory, a transport company. People from Umora will have first choice for employment. We will lift this village together. Chief Emeka stood, his old face thoughtful. You are doing what your father never did, he said. He made wealth and hoarded it, trusted no one, helped no one. You make wealth and share it. That is true greatness. Chukwudi bowed respectfully. My father taught me what not to do. My wife taught me what to do. All eyes turned to Adaeze, who sat beside her husband. She felt the weight of their gazes, respect, admiration, some envy, but also gratitude. She stood. I was the poorest among you, she said, her voice steady. I was mocked, pitied, looked down upon. I know how it feels to be nothing in people's eyes. So I promise you this. The school, the health center, the jobs, these are not charity. They are what you deserve. Every person in Umora deserves dignity, opportunity, hope. We will build this together. The applause was thunderous.
That night, lying in their new bedroom with its soft mattress and clean sheets, an electric light that didn't flicker like kerosene lamps, Adaeze turned to her husband. "Are you happy? Did you find what you were looking for?" Chukwudi was quiet for a moment, then said, "I found more than I was looking for. I set out to test character, to find real people in a false world. But what I found was that suffering reveals truth, not just in others, but in ourselves." He turned to face her, his eyes serious in the dim light. "These 3 months of poverty taught me more than 7 years of wealth ever could. They taught me that dignity is not about money, that strength comes from within, that a good heart is the rarest treasure." He took her hand. "I was so angry when you told me the truth," she admitted. "Part of me is still angry. You let us suffer when you could have helped." "I know," he said quietly. "That is a burden I will carry. But Adaeze, listen to me. If I had revealed my wealth immediately, I would never have known your true heart, and you would never have discovered your own strength. Sometimes God uses suffering to reveal gold." She thought about this, thought about the woman she had been 3 months ago, meek, beaten down, seeing herself as a burden, and the woman she was now, strong, confident, iron forged in fire. "Maybe you're right," she said slowly. "Maybe the fire needed to know I could survive it." They lay in comfortable silence for a while, then Chukwudi spoke again. "There's something I want to tell you about the earrings." Adaeze turned to him, curious. "I bought them back," he said. "The day you sold them, I sent someone to the trader. I paid triple what he gave you and retrieved them. They are in the safe downstairs waiting for you." Tears filled Adaeze's eyes. You bought them back?"
They were your mother's. They are precious. I could not let them be lost. He touched her face gently. "Just as you are precious, just as our love is precious, some things are worth any price." Adaeze kissed him then, properly, deeply, for the first time since their wedding. And in that kiss was forgiveness, gratitude, and the beginning of real love, the kind built not on pretense or testing, but on truth. The fifth change came 2 months later, in a form no one expected. Adaeze missed her monthly cycle, then missed it again. The test confirmed what her body already knew. She was pregnant. When she told Chukwudi, his face lit up with a joy so pure, it took her breath away. "A child," he whispered, his hand on her still flat belly. "Our child, born into truth, not pretense, born into love, not testing." They announced it to the family first. Mama Chukwudi wept with joy. Obinna grinned and promised to be the best uncle in Nigeria. Even Adaeze's father, when told, smiled genuinely for the first time in years. But it was the village's reaction that surprised Adaeze most. The women gathered, the same women who had mocked her, and organized a celebration. They brought gifts, offered advice, surrounded her with the communal care that was the best of Igbo culture. And Adaeze, despite everything, despite the memories of their cruelty, accepted their care, because she was learning something her husband had already learned. People are complex. They can be cruel and kind, false and true, often in the same breath. And forgiveness, real forgiveness, means accepting all of them and choosing grace anyway. 6 months into her pregnancy, on a bright Sunday morning, Adaeze stood in the new church Chukwudi had built for the village and gave her testimony. "I was poor," she told the congregation. "So poor that I sold my mother's earrings for medicine. So poor that people laughed when they saw me. But God used that poverty to teach me what truly matters." She looked at her husband, sitting in the front row, his eyes on her. "Money does not make you valuable. Character does. Integrity does. Love does. I married a man I thought was poor, and I was angry when I learned he was rich. But now I understand. We were both poor in ways that mattered, and we both became rich in ways that money cannot buy." She placed her hand on her swollen belly. "This child will grow up with wealth, yes, but more importantly, this child will grow up with the knowledge that people are worth more than money.
that suffering can teach what prosperity cannot, that true love is tested in fire and emerges as gold. The congregation erupted in amen and praise God. After the service, as they walked to their car, one of three that Chukwudi now owned, Adaeze turned to her husband. Do you think we made the right choice, staying in the village, building here instead of moving to the city? Chukwudi looked around at Mora, at the new school where children played, at the health center where the sick found healing, at the faces of people who now had jobs and hope and dignity. Yes, he said simply, this is where we belong. This is where our story began, and this is where it will continue. We will raise our children here, teach them the lessons we learned, show them that wealth means nothing if it is not used to lift others. Adaeze nodded, satisfied. As they drove past her father's compound, she saw Obiageli standing at the gate, watching them pass. The woman's face was a mask of regret and envy, a living example of how bitterness poisons the soul. Adaeze could have stopped, could have gloated, could have reminded Obiageli of every cruel word and deed. Instead, she simply waved, a small gesture of grace, and continued on. Some battles are won by fighting. Others are won by rising so high that your enemies can no longer reach you. 5 years later, Adaeze stood on the balcony of their home, watching the sunset over Umora village. The transformation was complete. Where there had once been dead paths, there were now paved roads. Where there had been one struggling primary school, there were now 3 modern schools, primary, secondary, and a vocational training center. The health center had expanded into a small hospital. The farm Chukwudi established employed over 200 people. The factory produced palm oil and gari for export. But more than the physical changes, the spirit of the village had transformed.
People walked with their heads higher. Children laughed more freely. The crushing poverty that had defined Umora for generations was lifting, slowly but surely, like morning mist before the sun. Adaeze's hand rested on her belly, pregnant again with their 3rd child. Their firstborn, Ada, was 4 years old, a bright, curious girl who asked endless questions. Their second, a boy they named Azubuike, after Chukwudi's father, was 2, quiet and observant, with his father's thoughtful eyes. Mama! Mama! Ada ran onto the balcony, her small face excited. Papa says to come. The visitors are here. Adaeze smiled and followed her daughter inside. Today was special, the day they had been preparing for. In the large sitting room, Chukwudi was entertaining a group of young people from across Nigeria. They had come to hear the story that had spread beyond Umora, beyond their state, across the country. The story of the billionaire who pretended to be poor and the wife who loved him anyway. It had become legend, retold in churches and at weddings, shared on social media and in motivational talks. People came from far and wide to see the couple, to learn from them, to understand how they had built not just wealth, but meaning. Tell us, a young woman asked eagerly, how did you forgive him? How did you move past the anger? Adaeze settled into her chair, Chukwudi beside her, their children playing nearby. Forgiveness, she began, is not about forgetting. I remember every moment of those 3 months, every humiliation, every hungry night, every cruel word. But I choose not to let those memories poison my present. She looked at her husband. He was wrong to test me without my knowledge, but he was also searching for something real in a world full of pretense. And I discovered strength I never knew I had. But wasn't it cruel, another visitor asked, to have wealth and hide it while people suffered? Chukwudi answered this time. Yes, he said simply. It was cruel. It was wrong. And if I could go back, I would... He paused, considering. I would do it differently. I would find another way. But I cannot change the past. I can only build a better future. He gestured around the room, out the windows at the transformed village. Every school, every job, every life changed. This is my apology.
This is how I tried to make amends for the suffering I allowed, not just to my wife and family, but to everyone in Umora who struggled while I had the power to help. An older man in the group spoke up. But you've also shown that money without character is worthless, that poverty can reveal gold. Is that not valuable? Perhaps, Adaeze said carefully, but let me be clear. Poverty is not noble. Suffering is not good. What is valuable is how people respond to hardship, but no one should have to prove their worth through unnecessary suffering. She stood, her pregnancy making the movement slow. If there is one lesson from our story, it is this: judge people by their character, not their circumstances. The same woman who was mocked as poor is the same woman who is now respected as rich. I did not change, only my circumstances changed, and that should tell you something about how we value people. The room was silent, absorbing this. A young man raised his hand. What about the people who mocked you? Your stepmother, how do you treat them now? Adaeze smiled slightly. My stepmother and I have an understanding. I help my father, I help my sister Chiamaka. I ensure my younger siblings from Obiageli can go to good schools. But Obiageli herself? She shook her head. She must live with her choices. I do not punish her, but I do not reward her cruelty either. And the others who mocked you? Some have apologized sincerely. Those I have forgiven and we have moved on. Others want forgiveness, but only because I am now wealthy. Those I treat with polite distance. Forgiveness is free, but trust must be earned. Chukwudi added, we have learned that not everyone who smiles at you is your friend, and not everyone who criticizes you is your enemy. Discernment is a gift that poverty taught us. The visitors stayed for hours, asking questions, taking photos, absorbing wisdom. When they finally left, promising to return, Adaeze and Chukwudi sat together in the quiet of their home. Do you ever regret it? Marrying me, going through all of that? Chukwudi asked softly. Adaeze looked at their sleeping children, at the home they had built, at the village they had transformed, at the man beside her who had become her true partner. No, she said firmly. I regret the suffering, I regret the cruelty, but I don't regret the journey, because it led me here, to this life, to this love, to becoming who I was always meant to be.
She took his hand. You gave me a test I didn't know I was taking, but God used it to give me something I didn't know I needed. The knowledge that I am strong, that I am valuable, that I am enough, with or without money. Chukwudi kissed her forehead. You are always enough, Adam, always. As the years continued to pass, the story of Adaeze and Chukwudi became more than just a story. It became a movement. Young people across Nigeria started character clubs inspired by their example, focused on building integrity over wealth. Churches used their testimony to teach about discernment, forgiveness, and the dangers of judging by appearances. Business schools studied Chukwudi's model of wealth sharing and community development. And in Umuoro itself, the village became a destination, not for tourists, but for people seeking to understand what true prosperity looked like. Not just money, but dignity. Not just wealth, but purpose. Adaeze started a foundation for young girls forced into unwanted marriages. She traveled to villages across Igbo land, speaking to fathers and families about the value of their daughters beyond bride price. Your daughter is not a burden, she would tell them. She is a treasure, and how you treat her today will determine whether she becomes gold or dust. Chukwudi, meanwhile, became a mentor to young entrepreneurs, teaching them not just how to make money, but how to make it mean something. Wealth is a tool, he would say. You can use it to build walls or bridges,
to separate yourself from others or to lift others up. The choice is yours. Their children grew up understanding that they were privileged, but that privilege meant responsibility. Ada, their eldest, showed an early interest in medicine and would often accompany her mother to the hospital to visit sick children. As Weke, true to his namesake, was fascinated by business and would sit in on his father's meetings, absorbing everything. The third child, a girl they named Chinwe, Chi's own, was still too young to show her path, but she was fierce and bright, with her mother's iron will and her father's calm wisdom. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Chukwudi arranged a surprise for Adaeze. He took her back to the stream where he had first seen her, the place where this entire journey began. But now, instead of a muddy riverbank, there was a beautiful garden with a stone monument. On the monument was a plaque that read, "Here, a poor girl washed clothes and sang songs of hope. Here, a watching man learned what true wealth looked like. Here began a love story that transformed a village. Let all who come here remember, character is the truest currency." Adaeze wept when she read it. "This is beautiful," she whispered. "But Chukwudi, I was so broken that day, so sad. Is that really what you saw?" He said, "I saw a woman who refused to let circumstances break her spirit. I saw someone who found dignity in small tasks. I saw my future wife, though I didn't know it yet." He pulled her close. "And I thank God every day that you chose to love me, even when you thought I had nothing to offer."
"You always had something to offer," she said. "Your integrity, your respect, your quiet strength. I just didn't recognize it at first because I was looking for the wrong things." They stood by the stream as the sun set, casting gold across the water, and reflected on how far they had come. From poverty to prosperity, from despair to joy, from testing to trust, from strangers to soulmates. It had not been an easy journey. There had been pain, anger, regret, but there had also been growth, transformation, and a love deeper than either of them had imagined possible. And as the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Adaeze thought about the question she would one day ask their children, the question that would ensure the lessons learned were never forgotten. If you had to choose between wealth without character and poverty with integrity, which would you choose? She knew what her answer would be now. She had lived both sides of that question, and she knew the truth. Money comes and goes. Circumstances change. Wealth can be lost in a moment. But character, integrity, the strength forged in fire, those last forever. 20 years later, Umuora village had become a model for rural development across Nigeria. Dignitaries came from other countries to study what Chukwudi and Adaeze had built. The village was prosperous, yes, but more importantly, it was whole. Adaeze, now in her 50s, but still beautiful, still strong, sat in the same church where she had given her testimony all those years ago. Today was special, her daughter Ada's wedding day. Ada had become a doctor just as she dreamed and was marrying a teacher from the vocational school her parents had built. Not a wealthy man, but a good man, a man of character. As Adaeze watched her daughter walk down the aisle, radiant in her white dress, she thought about the full circle of life. She had been forced into marriage, but her daughter was choosing freely. She had married into poverty, but her daughter was marrying for love. She had suffered humiliation, but her daughter walked with dignity. After the ceremony, at the reception in the grand hall of the community center, another building the Okafors had funded, Ada came to sit with her mother. "Mama," she said, "I want to thank you." "For what, my daughter?" "For showing me what real strength looks like, for teaching me that circumstances don't define worth, for..."
Ada's voice caught with emotion. For loving Papa even when it was hard, for building all of this, for being who you are. Adaeze hugged her daughter tight. You would have been strong no matter what, Ada. That is who you are. Maybe, Ada said, but I learned it from you. Across the hall, Chukwudi was dancing with Chinwe, their youngest, now a university student studying social justice. Azubuike, who had taken over much of the family business, was laughing with friends. Mama Chukwudi, elderly now but still sharp, sat in the place of honor, surrounded by grandchildren and great-grandchildren, her face peaceful. Even Adaze's father was there, widowed now. Obiageli had passed 3 years prior, bitter to the end, but he had spent his last years making amends, being a better grandfather than he had been a father. As Adaeze surveyed the scene, the joy, the love, the community they had built, she felt Chukwudi's arm around her waist. What are you thinking, Adam? He asked. I'm thinking, she said slowly, that every tear was worth it. Every moment of suffering led to this, to them. She gestured at their children, their grandchildren, the village filled with people living better lives because of choices made decades ago. Do you still remember those 3 months? He asked. The hardest time? Every single day, I admitted, but not with pain anymore, with gratitude, because that fire made me who I am. She turned to face him, this man who had tested me, challenged me, loved me, built with me. Thank you, she said. For what? For seeing me when I was invisible, for choosing me when I was worthless in the world's eyes, she smiled, for being stubborn enough to honor your father's wish, even though it meant we both had to suffer. Chukwudi laughed, that deep, rumbling laugh she had come to love. My father would be proud, I think, not of the wealth, he knew I would have that, but of what we did with it, of who we became. Who we became, Adaeze repeated softly. Not who we were or who we pretended to be, but who we truly are. As the party continued around them, as music played and people danced and children laughed, Adaeze thought about the young girl she had been, the one who sat under the dying Odara tree, crying, thinking her life was over. If she could go back and speak to that girl, what would she say? Hold on. The night is darkest before dawn. What looks like an ending is actually a beginning. That man they're forcing you to marry, he will show you what love really means. That poverty you fear you cannot imagine surviving, it will forge you into iron. Hold on. God is writing a story you cannot yet see. Trust the process, trust the pain, trust that beauty can emerge from ashes. Hold on. Your best life is not behind you, it's ahead. Just hold on. The music swelled and Chukwudi pulled her onto the dance floor. As they moved together, as they had moved through life, sometimes stumbling, sometimes soaring, but always together, Adaeze laughed. She had found her happy ending, but more than that, she had found her purpose, her strength, her voice. And that was worth every tear she had cried along the way. Now, dear reader, I ask you this question. What would have happened if you were in Adaze's place? If you married someone you thought was poor, only to discover they were wealthy but had deliberately hidden it to test you? Would you forgive them? Would you see it as a betrayal or a blessing? And more importantly, do you believe that suffering can truly refine us into gold, or does it just leave scars? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Would you have stayed with Chukwudi, or would you have walked away? What does this story teach you about love, wealth, character, and the test that life brings? Let's discuss. Your perspective matters.